started. So we're going to look at landscape archaeology, and we're going to look at archaeological excavation. So I thought we've done a nice little overview in the previous 8 sessions. And I think the best thing to do is, now that we've done all the little bits and pieces, is to go into understanding archaeological excavation a bit more. And at the same time, looking at what we can learn from buildings standing as well, upstanding archaeology. So that's more or less what I introduced last week. So the first thing it would be best to do, I'll keep you down the side of the screen because there's not a massive number of us, so that's fine. So looking at the beginnings of archaeological excavation and where archaeology started. So I'm going to do this in 2 parts. This week, I'll look at some of the main movers in archaeology from the beginning. Some names you may have heard of, other names you may not have heard of, and 1 or 2 names that might actually surprise you. So we'll do that this week. And then after we've looked at all this, it would be nice to sort of discuss archaeological excavation from a discussion point of view and bring Bill into this as well, because Bill's been involved in active archaeological excavations in the past as well. So we've got an individual in front of us, and this individual is known as Hesiod. And Hesiod comes into archaeology in the period of archaeology that is something that you might not have heard of, the speculative phase of archaeology. So humans have always speculated about their past. We've always been interested in our past. We've always tried to understand who we are. It's not just about aliens, and it's not just about myths and legends. It's not just about religion. Speculating about who we are based on what we see around us is something that goes back a very long way. So artifacts, buildings, what do those things mean? It used to be thought, for example, that when Anglo-Saxon people wandered around Norfolk and Kent around the year 600, 700 years AD, over 1,500 years ago, they used to think that little flint heads, little arrowheads that they used to find in woods and dug out through molehills, actually belonged to fairy people and people that lived either today or in the past. So there was speculation to what those flints meant. Now, you could laugh and think, well, they were wrong, but they were interested. Most cultures have their own foundation myths to explain why society is the way it is. In the medieval period, we really turned to Christianity to try and understand where we came from, to give us some rules. The past can offer us rules and structure and understanding. You know, I was given recently a box of birth certificates for my family going back to the late 1800s. And it's about me, particularly about me. It's about my family. And to be interested in yourself is very much the reason why lots of people go into archaeology, to understand what is our makeup, where do we come from, who are we? Some people can go into psychology, sociology, theology. Some people could just be historians. Some people can try and understand themselves by living history. Some people can turn to archaeology, and that's what we're doing. The Greek writer Hesiod, for instance, who lived around 800 years BC, he wrote an epic poem, Works and Days. Works and Days is an interesting work. It envisaged the human past as falling into stages, 5 stages. Now, this is interesting because he was thinking of his own timeline, 800 years BC, as having a past. He wanted to put that past into categories. And by putting things in the past into categories can then help you understand the layers of the past. So the earliest layer means this, and this layer means that, and so on and so on. So stratigraphy. So people have been thinking about stratigraphy and timelines for a very long time. So this is close on 3,000 years ago that we know of. And it's likely that people have been studying and picking things up and interested for a lot longer than that. On pottery from the Minoan period, for example, 3,600 years ago, they might have been trying to interpret the past. So the first stage that he set, Hesiod, was the Age of Gold and the Immortals. Good start, the Age of Gold. And he said that this Age of Gold was a period, in his own words, well, obviously translated, the Age of Gold dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things. So that was one stage. So maybe he might have thought that if you dig deep enough, that you're going to just find gold. You're not going to find the other stuff, like the next age. The next age is the Age of Silver, when humans were less noble. Now, he's given an explanation. So you've got gold and then you've got silver. Rather interesting, that is. Because we don't have a gold age and we don't have a lead age and we don't have a silver age. But to him, 800 years BC, there was this gold, then silver age. And then, interesting enough, he came up with the Age of Bronze, which he said was the age of epic heroes. And this age of epic heroes, we're very much into that period of the Mycenaeans. We look at Homer's Iliad before Homer wrote the Iliad. So look at that, the epic heroes. Amazing, that one. And even though we've got 5 stages, there's one missing in this formula. But then we go on to this next age after the Bronze Age, the Age of Iron and Dread Sorrow. This is the age you actually lived in. Okay, so I don't know where the 5th age comes from. Probably the age before the Gold Age, but let's not get too het up on that one. So the age that he lived in, interestingly enough, the age that he was describing was the age of iron and dread, the age of iron and dread sorrow. This was the age he saw around him. He lived at the beginning of the Iron Age. He lived at the beginning of change. He recorded these changes. Today, we could say that the last century was a century of war and technology, then computers. And what are we now going to call this period? The age of diseases? Each age has a name for it that we like to put on it, something very specific. And this age that he's describing, this iron period, this iron age, men never rest from labor and sorrow by day and from perishing by night. So in a way, this is the first man in history to actually come up with the term, the Age of Iron. Many years before Tomlinson comes up with this age system in the 1830s, right? Tomlinson, a Danish historian archaeologist, comes up with the age system, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. But the Bronze Age and the Iron Age had already been thought of by Hesiod because he was interested. He had an interest in the past. Most cultures, too, have been fascinated by societies that preceded them. They sometimes get them wrong. You know, it would be a danger for me to say that the period of Arthur existed or not. But we've got a period of our history, which we call the Dark Ages, that we don't really understand. So we call it the period of Arthur. Now, the Aztecs, for example, saw a previous civilization before them. And the Aztecs existed from the 13 to 14 to 1521, then when they come across Cortez, and that was the end of the Aztec world. But they actually thought way back. They actually thought of the Toltecs. They had a Toltec ancestry. So let's sort of, the Toltec ancestry. And they, like many cultures now, we exaggerate the past. I wasn't going to mention this, but I didn't know this up until today, that when the Germans were interested in archaeology to develop their pure Aryan race, Adolf Hitler in 1935 didn't approve of Himmler and the Ahnenerbe, because he wrote that Himmler was finding roundhouses and basic stuff, when in fact Germany had partly been conquered by the Germans. Germany had partly been conquered by the Romans. And he said, why is Himmler digging up all these things? He's really embarrassing my plan. You know, we don't need the people to know this, that we were living in roundhouses when the Romans were invading Germany. You know, he didn't want people to know that. He wanted to write that out of history. Anyway, I saw that today, and I might look at that a little bit in the future to try and understand it a little bit more. So the Aztecs were talking about this great city, Teotihuacan, a huge Mexican city abandoned hundreds of years before their time. And they linked this with the Toltecs, when they probably should have linked this with the Maya. And they looked at their past and they said, well, look at us Aztecs, look at the glorious past that we've got. So there's instantly, we're looking at the Aztecs, people that their civilization was wiped out 500 years ago, more or less to the day. And they're looking at the past, trying to understand their present, trying to understand their identity, that the Germans were doing in the Second World War, that the Aztecs were doing 500 years ago, when they're looking at the Toltecs and the Maya and misinterpreting things. And they incorporated ceremonial stone masks from this site at Teotihuacan. And they use these masks to enrich the foundation of their new cities in the Aztec world. Basically say, look at us, you know, we come from a great Toltec stock, when it was actually the Mayans that were building these. A rather more detached curiosity about the relics of bygone ages developed in several early civilizations. Now, you'd be surprised to know that the first recorded museum existed over 2,500 years ago. When we were still thinking about the British Museum at the end of the 1700s, going into the 1800s, and we're thinking about the Elgin marbles, and they were established in the National Museum in Denmark in the 1830s, blah, blah, blah. Right. Before that, over 2,000 years before that, museums had existed. I don't know if any of you knew this. Julius Caesar, amongst other things, was actually a collector of old coins. Julius Caesar collected old coins. He was a numismatist. Couldn't get the word out then. So he actually collected coins. And so people, again, that's a famous figure in history that we know told us about his collection of coins. He couldn't have had a great collection of coins because coins had only been used for a few hundred years up until his age, but nevertheless, he was interested in them. So this detached curiosity, early civilizations, where scholars and even rulers collected and studied objects from the past. So we turn from Central America now to this guy. He's a leader known as Nabonidus, the last native king of Babylon, the last native king of the ancient kingdom of Babylonia. And Nabonidus was a very keen collector of the past. And we need to stop there. When we think about the Old Testament, when we think about the Bible, in a way, the Bible is a record of history. And, you know, people knew about old buildings, and lots of what we see written about in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular, are places, times, and moments that actually did exist, recorded in the Bible. And maybe at that time, somebody actually kept relics like Nabonidus in a museum. But those museums haven't really survived. This last native king of Babylon, took a keen interest in antiquities. In one important temple, he dug down and discovered the foundation stone, which had been laid some 2,200 years before. So you can imagine this man, Nabonidus, the last native king of Babylon, was interested in a civilization that had existed 2,200 years before his time. So Nabonidus lived 2,500 years ago. So the time that has gone between Nabonidus' death and today is the same time that had more or less been between Nabonidus finding this foundation stone and a civilization that has existed before him. And I think that's absolutely amazing. That's really amazing to think that we are not the only ones interested in history, archaeology, our origins. There's always been this really, really deep study. And he housed many of the finds that he was discovering in a kind of museum in Babylon. I don't know if you can get a kind of museum. A museum is a museum, end of story. It's a museum is a collection of relics, which he would go around saying this belongs to people that existed a long time before me. I don't know. He wouldn't have said 2,000 years before him, but he may have. He may have understood that concept because there was cuneiform writing. There were lots more records around that he could read that we don't understand. And maybe he knew that these people existed over 2,000 years before him. Wouldn't that be great? During the revival of learning in Europe, known as the Renaissance, between the late 1300s into the 1600s, princes and people of refinement began to form cabinets of curiosities. This isn't the house of Lord Carnarvon, where Howard Carter would occasionally send home artifacts from the tomb of Tutankhamun. A cabinet of curiosities. People have kept cabinets of curiosities for hundreds and hundreds of years. If they were to find them without digging, or they've come to those curiosities, curios, like the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. This has been done for a long time. These curios and ancient artifacts were displayed somewhat haphazardly, alongside exotic minerals and all manners of specimens illustrated of what was called natural history. So they didn't have a name. They didn't call it archaeology 3,000 years ago. They didn't call it that. But this was natural history. So wood history's in there. During the Renaissance, also scholars began to study and collect the relics of classical antiquity. Now, classical antiquity didn't exist there was no such thing as Egypt. Nobody saw classical antiquity as being ancient Egypt. What they did see as classical antiquity was the lands of Greece and Rome, and began to, in more northern lands, move into the places of Greece and Rome, but they might actually go into Asia Minor and find artifacts to study the local relics of that past. And some people at home were actually thinking, instead of going on the grand tour to Europe, what about history and archaeology at home? People were starting to look in the early 1700s, late 1600s, at the history of their own land. You know, I've got a nice little example of a coin of a Welsh prince being discovered in the mid 1600s, and somebody kept it with them, and it was the only coin of this Welsh prince ever found. And people said that they saw this coin. It was carried around as a little curio, and people carried strange objects around with them. And then these things got lost because they didn't go in museums, because museums didn't exist. But people had curiosities with them. So people started to look at home as well. At this time, these were mainly the field monuments, those conspicuous sites often made of stone, which immediately attracted attention. Just like this one. Now, we all know where this is. Stonehenge. So people started looking at these sites and they were interested. Avebury, Stonehenge, Hadrian's Wall, maybe one or two standing stones in Cornwall, and maybe one or two monuments elsewhere. So people were actually starting to look at home, at the past, and they were impressed by the past. So not only did people want to feel a sense of identity, they could see that the people of the past were very impressive. You know, there was something very, very powerful about people from the past if they were able to create wonderful monuments like the monument in front of you, Stonehenge. And usually when they would sketch these sites, this is actually sketched by William Stukeley. When they would sketch these sites, they would under-exaggerate the scale of the people, and it would over-exaggerate the scale of the sites. But then again, if anyone's ever been to Stonehenge, it's a very, very impressive site. And what people started to do, for example, this is an illustration from 1722 in one of William Stukeley's own publications. People would wish to go to places like this, more closer to home. This is in Brittany. This is Carnac, and people would start to write about these things. So this is threefold. Not only are they finding artifacts from the past and seeing a sense of their identity, they're finding monuments from the past and trying to connect with that identity, and also they're writing this stuff up and letting other people know that this stuff is around. So the public image of archaeology, the past, history, antiquity, is starting to build. So so we saw the earlier image, and William Stukeley would have been aware of this site in Carnac in Brittany. So William Stukeley was living from 1687 to 1765, and he made systematic studies of sites. He would make accurate drawings of them, which are still useful today, because actually, if these people hadn't have done these things, we think about Stukeley, he's at Stonehenge, he's at Stonehenge 300 years ago. You know, things have changed at Stonehenge since, and they've changed again. And, you know, in many ways, lots of what we see from these sites has now changed over time. So the accurate plans are still very, very useful today. So when did people actually start digging up these monuments? When did they actually start trying to systematize these monuments? When did they actually start going below the ground? The first excavations really started to begin in the 1700s. People become more adventurous. People started to think, well, William Stukeley is saying this about, you know, Avebury, but is there more underneath the surface? And people would go to places like Pompeii. So adventurous researchers initiated excavation on some of the most prominent sites. Pompeii in Italy was one of the first of these. You know, people would go to places like Pompeii and they would just go on a jolly. It's an opportunity to find human remains, or it's an opportunity to find some coins, or a bronze statue, or a bit of carved stone. This is where archaeology started to become very inquisitive. This speculative age is very inquisitive period. And Pompeii became very striking. Everyone wanted to go there. Pompeii, in a way, was the first time team, because, you know, I used to always, when in about the 1990s through to the 2000s, whenever you used to go up to anyone, used to say, "Oh, I'm an archaeologist." They used to say time team every time. So if you were wanting to dig up the past, you would go to Pompeii. That's where you would go. So Pompeii, in a way, was the early time team of the era, under 300 years ago. But that's just digging holes in the ground, maybe making little records like this. Yeah. There's loads of different people there from France, Germany, England, even the fledgling USA. And the fledgling USA is where we're going to go now, to this man. I'm not going to ask if anyone knows who this is, but if anyone wants to shout out who this individual is from the United States, they will get brownie points. Any guesses? He was the third.
Jefferson?
Yes.
Give us a clue.
Yeah, no, it's tough. Jessica's already done it. If you didn't hear, if you hang on, Jessica, don't say anything. Who was the third president of the United States?
The third.
The third.
John
yeah.
Adams. John Adams.
No.
Oh, John Quincy Adams, isn't it?
No, Thomas Jefferson.
Ah, Thomas Jefferson.
Actually, Quincy Adams. That's a good guess, actually, but that's because you were thinking of the Wales connection. The credit for conducting what has been called the first scientific excavations in the history of archaeology, the first archaeologist, was in fact the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. From 1743 to 1626, this man lived, and he had a career as a president and a plantation owner. And in 1784, dug the first scientifically set trench or section across a burial mound on his property in Virginia. What I'm going to do, I'm going to mute him. Was that Bill? Very bad boy. Very bad boy. So he actually had one of his properties, one of his plantations in Virginia. He actually dug the first scientific excavation. He dug a trench. The first person happened to be the president of the United States. He digs a trench. Once a president of the United States, always a president of the United States. So this trench was actually dug in 1784, and basically it was a trench or section across a burial mound on his property in Virginia. And we're going to go back to that in a minute, because these are the types of mounds that were being excavated. And he would then go to write these up. So he's not only excavating a monument, he's putting a section in, he's recording things, he's writing them up. And Jefferson's work marks the beginning of the end of the speculative phase. In other words, people are no longer guessing what something's happening in the past. They're actually able to see it. They're actually able to understand the layers. Below our feet, there are layers. And he's able to start to read those layers. And he records those layers. The lowest level, the middle level, and the upper level and the topsoil, those layers. So he's actually very scientific. So it's the end of all that speculation. It's the end of digging holes at Pompeii and guesswork, right? It's real archaeology. In Jefferson's time, people were speculating that the hundreds of unexplained mounds known east of the Mississippi River had been built not by the indigenous American individuals, but by a mythical and vanished race of mound builders. Jefferson, however, wanted to understand what this was about. And, you know, in point of fact, this is another little thing. We digress. They've actually been excavating Monterero, the place of Jefferson's home, and they've been excavating on his property, and they've been excavating the china that he would have used. So, you know, in other words, what we've got the archaeology of an archaeologist, which is great. You see lots of archaeology of archaeologists throughout the periods, throughout the years. So Jefferson is not only the first archaeologist. His spall heaps and whatever are now being excavated. You know, it's great, really interesting that. So Jefferson, anyway, going back to what's relevant, writing all this up and the mounds. Jefferson adopted what today we should call a scientific approach. That is, he tested ideas about mounds against hard evidence. Instead of agreeing that these were built by a mystery race of mound builders, he decided to excavate them. His methods were careful enough to allow him to recognize different layers in his trenches, and to see that the many human bones present were less well preserved in the lower layers, meaning that the lower layers were older than the layers above. That may sound obvious, but he's reading layers. He's reading the pages of the book. From this, he deducted that the mound had been reused as a place of burial on many separate occasions. Although Jefferson admitted rightly that more evidence was needed to resolve the mound builder question, he saw no reason why ancestors of the present-day Indians themselves could not have raised the mounds. So scientifically, I know we know it now, but scientifically, he was saying, look, guys, right? These Native Americans were capable of doing this. The people who built these mounds are the ancestors of the present-day Native Americans. That's what he was saying. Except then he called them Indians. So we start to move into all of this. Jefferson was ahead of his time. His sound approach logic deducted from careful excavation evidence in many ways the basis of modern archaeology. So it goes all the way back to Jefferson. So one thing that we must say is that even though these techniques were being developed, it would take a while before people started examining the native sites again in North America. You know, even as much as Jefferson was respected, it's almost as if he had made a lead in interpreting archaeology, but it took people in Europe to move things forward, not America, to move things forward. So in Europe, after Jefferson was not speculating, scientifically saying that these mounds are likely to have been built by the present day descendants of the people that we see around us today, it was to Europe that we turned next. And in Europe, we didn't do as good a job as Jefferson had done. Now, I've got a book behind me. I was debating whether I was going to do anything from that book with you guys. It's a book about early excavations. I'm still thinking about it. But early excavations in Britain were now really starting to run ahead of schedule. By the late 1700s, antiquarians would be digging up mounds 2 or 3 a day up on the Wiltshire Plain or somewhere else in Britain where you've got loads of mounds. This was a period of digging mounds. One such guy who was digging into these mounds was a chap by the name of Richard Hall, H-O-A-R-E, who lived between 1758 and 1838. He undertook extensive excavations on hundreds and hundreds of mounds in southern Britain during the first decade of the 1800s. He was prolific. Basically, what he would say, come on, Rich, come on, bring the shovel and we'll dig a mound up in the field over there. You got a bit of time, haven't you, Rich? That's what we're going to do. I tell you what, Pauline, we'll bring Pauline along, Richard, and she can bring the pack lunch. And Jessica can carry the shovels. This is a type of thing that they would do on a Sunday, right? So people would do archaeological excavation in their leisure time. It was a bit like modern day metal detecting, but people would dig mounds up to see what they could find. curiosity. So it wasn't speculative. They wanted to see what was in those mounds. They wanted to open those mounds up. So it's likely that thousands of these mounds between the late 1700s and the early 1800s were opened up. And one of these guys was Richard Colt Hall. None of these excavations, however, did much to advance the cause of knowledge about the distant past. He did make notes, he did make plans, he did record what was there, which was useful. But it was that interpretation that was wrong. The interpretation was wrong. Not so much the technique was wrong as well, but at least things were being recorded. He would wish to find things and then he would tie it in with the Bible. And as we know, the earth at that point had only been around for just over 4,000 years. So in other words, anything found, you would say, well, this dates to this period, and obviously then the dinosaurs, and that's it, and whatever, right? So it was the dating system that was wrong. However, again, the old adage, if you look at the past, this individual, Hesiod, had already worked out that there was periods in the past that probably led to the past being a lot older than this guy and his contemporaries were saying. And this was the problem. So on that table, you can see this is a large Neolithic bucket container. I think that's the type. Sometimes known as cordonware and all the rest of it. That big container there, dating to the Neolithic period, probably about 3,500 years ago. 3,500 years BC, right? So it's 3,500 years BC. So that's approximately 5,500 years ago. He wouldn't have given that date because the earth wouldn't have existed back that far in his mind based on the Bible. And he's obviously got Neolithic pottery there of a little bit of a later date as well. But these didn't come in with any type of time sign that we would recognize today. But he did publish his work. So back to what we were saying about Jefferson, this guy did get something right. And there we go, this handsome man. Tell you what, he looks a lot more handsome with his beard. He looks a bit like Bill, really. But this man here is a character that I do mention on a regular basis. He's not Sir Mortimer Wheeler. He's actually a man known by the name of William Flinders Petrie. However, there is a man that I miss out on a regular basis. Before Flinders Petrie, before this individual here, there was a character known as General Augustus Lane Fox Pitt Rivers. So he's got 4 surnames there, and they're both double-barreled. He was a general, not this man, but the man before him. And this man, towards the 1850s, 1860s, saw that there needs to be something more methodical with archaeology than just digging into mounds. So the development of field techniques. Now we're talking into field techniques. Before Schliemann's excavating at Troy, this man known as General Augustus Lane Pitt Rivers, and not Flinders Petrie, is the man who advances method and science. It was only in the late 1800s that a sound methodology of scientific excavation began to be generally adopted. From that time and during the current century, major figures stand out in their various ways. And these individuals have helped us advance archaeology no end. General Augustus Lane Fox Pitt Rivers, for much of his life, was a professional soldier. But Pitt Rivers brought long experience of military methodology and survey, precision to impeccably organized excavations on his estates in southern England. So he was doing something very different from Colt Hall. He would be excavating sites on his estate, but he would be making plans, sections, and even models of what he had excavated. And the other thing, he would record the exact position of every single object found in his excavations, the exact position of a bit of pottery, a bit of bone, everything. He would record those layers. So our man, Pitt Rivers, is somebody that we're going to look at a little bit more detail next week. We're going to put a face to him. And Pitt Rivers was not interested in beautiful treasure. He was not interested in recovering very valuable things. He was interested in recovering the mundane and recording the mundane and putting that mundane into a picture of the past, into the layers of the past, into an understanding of the past, surveying the past and making it very relevant. He was a pioneer. And he had an insistence of total recording. And his 4 privately printed volumes describing his excavations on Cranbourne Chase from 1887 to 1898 represented the highest standards of archaeological publication. So we'll mention a little bit about that man next week, but I would like now to go on to this character in front of you. Sir William Flinders Petrie. Now, you know, I did mention Flinders Petrie in, I think, the past few lectures. I didn't mention him today, actually, but Flinders Petrie. So Flinders Petrie was one of those old men of archaeology. He was born in 1853, died in 1942. So a nearly good 90 years of his life, and most of it was completely dedicated to archaeology. He was a complete obsessive in regards to archaeology. So was his wife. So you can imagine 2 very obsessive characters, and they brought children into the world, and they took their children on the excavations and everything. So Flinders Petrie was a young contemporary of Pitt Rivers. He learned from Pitt Rivers. And Petrie was likewise noted for his meticulous excavations and his insistence on the collection and description of every object that was found. And the thing is, I'm sure if photography was around back then in the way we've got photography today, I'm sure he would photograph every single surface of the pottery. He would put it on the internet. Every single find would go on YouTube every single day, that type of thing. And he loved his descriptions of the objects that he found, and not just the fine objects, and he would be meticulous on his publications. He employed these methods in his exemplary excavations in Egypt and later in Palestine. From the 1880s until his death, Petrie also devised his own technique, which he called seriation. I've mentioned seriation before, or sequence dating. So over the past weeks, we've been mentioning about absolute dating and relative dating methods. So this relative dating method, sequence dating, was devised by this man in front of you. He used to bring chronology to over 2,200 graves that he dug at the Nagada cemetery in Egypt. And the problem that he found at the Nagada cemetery in Egypt was that everything was in sand, and in sand you don't really get layers. So he thought, right, how can you do layers but without layers? And he came up with a seriation method. So we'll just show you that little bit of a chart. We might actually come back to this again. And there he is in his latter days. Seriation. So seriation dating, Flinders Petrie seriation, form of typological dating, arranged all objects from graves in topological sequence, then arrange groups of similar finds in a sequence or serial order. So what we're saying, that the plainest stuff is the oldest, and then the more complicated is the newer. Pottery that's not painted is older than pottery that is painted. Pottery that doesn't have handles is older than potteries that have handles. Potteries that have advanced shapes and forms to them are newer than potteries that are very plain. Rims that are very plain are older than rims that are very advanced and all the rest of it. So this is a method that he come together with seriation. So he's able to work out that a body buried with plain objects was older than a body buried with objects that had jug handles. And that's where seriation comes in, because this is how things evolve. Some of you, when we did the lecture today, and we were looking at Malta, and I said I got very excited about Neolithic pottery with handles. Now, that's an evolution. That's an innovation. But the earliest Neolithic pottery on Malta wouldn't have had handles. That's how seriation works. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I just wanted to give you an overview. Sorry. This man, come on, Bill. Who is this man in front of you? He's not there. Jessica, who is this man?
I'm not sure.
Come on, Richard.
He looks familiar, but I can't put my finger on it.
Richard used to watch him on television in the 1960s. Come on, Richard.
Mortimer Wheeler.
There it is, R.E.M. Wheeler. Now, R.E.M. Wheeler is somebody whose name falls off the tongue. And he falls off the tongue, not because he was a complete womanizer, but he falls off the tongue because he became the first archaeological television celebrity of the 1950s, 1960s. And he was a television celebrity alongside a local archaeologist called Glyn Daniels, who was also Dr. Glyn Daniels, both of them, Sir Mortimer Wheeler. Sir Mortimer Wheeler fought in the British Army in both World Wars, and like Pitt Rivers, brought military precision to his excavations, notably through techniques such as the grid square method, which is, voila! Now this is actually a bank at Maiden Castle. This is the rear entrance to Maiden Castle, and what he did was to, before he dug it into the ground, he laid out a trench, right? And you would go completely vertical into the ground. And then what you then could do, you could read the layers in the boxes. So when you're drawing these up, you can work out where everything is. So say, for example, there's a browny green layer here. You match that up with a browny green layer over here and a greeny brown layer over here, and you find pottery. And across the site, you can work out that these are the same dates, right? So you can read those layers. And then you've got a grey layer all the way through. You can read these layers, and you can put everything into sequence: walls, banks, ditches. Try to work out things. It's basically taking the reading of layers, the typology of pottery, seriation, everything else that we've known, using military techniques and really understanding what the archaeology is about. So he is well known for his excavations at Maiden Castle, the Great British Hill Fort near Dorchester in Dorset, a 50-acre site. So he excavated part of it. Equally outstanding, however, was his achievements from 1944 to 1948. The question is where? Indus Valley, India. Basically, this man, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, became the Director General of Archaeology in India. You can't make her up, can you? It's like, I'm the Director General of Archaeology. And I'm sure everybody would have worn a uniform as well. Between 1944 and 1948, so when India was partitioned, he was the Director General of Archaeology. He was taken out of active military service and partitioned, and in 1948 he was still in a job where he held training excavations in modern field methods and excavated at the important sites of Harappa, Taquila, and Aracamendu, one of his most famous excavations. And the method he used was this. Because with the sites that he was talking about with the Indus Valley and sites across India, was that you get all these different layers of silt, and to be able to read these layers of silt, you can't just go down on them, take out the whole area. You've got to use these grid, box, square excavation techniques to actually understand what's going on. Now, I do not have a balance tonight with the pioneers of archaeology. And it's probably because I mentioned Gertrude Cato Thompson a few times earlier on today. But women are massive pioneers in archaeology because they bring something else to archaeology. They don't bring the military. They bring order in the way they interpret it. Like Kathleen Kenyon, another great of archaeology. Like Jaquita Hawkes, another great of archaeology. Gertrude Bell. This is Dorothy Garrod. Very, very beautiful looking woman. And Dorothy Garrod in 1937 became the first woman professor in any subject at Cambridge, a woman professor of archaeology in 1937. She lived between 1892 and 1968, and probably the first woman, a prehistorian, to achieve professional status anywhere in the world. So she was a first. Lots of British female archaeologists were the first in lots of ways. Her excavation at a site known as Zarzee in Iraq and Mount Carmel in Palestine provided the key to a large section of the Near East, from the Middle Paleolithic to the Mesolithic, and found fossil human remains crucial to our knowledge of the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens. And with the discovery of the Natufian culture, the predecessor of the world's first farming societies, she posed a series of new problems still not fully resolved today. So she was a pioneer of her age, working in the Middle East. She was understanding areas of archaeology that were still very, very much new. And you can see in her eyes the passion that all archaeologists have for the past. So we've mentioned 3 British archaeologists, male archaeologists. We mentioned 1 female British archaeologist. But and we've mentioned Thomas Jefferson, and we've mentioned other figures as well. But just be good to, there she is as well, Dorothy Garrod, doing one of her typical examinations in wonderful Iraq. And we look at this guy, Max Uhl. Max Uhl. Now, in 1856, 1944, Max Uhl took to advancing archaeology in South America, 1856, 1944. He owes, with his work, a German scholar who trained as a physiologist and then turned to archaeology and ethnography. So he missed all that Ananurbe stuff, and he was working in South America. His excavations at Pachacamac, which we're going to look at some artifacts from that site. So this is Max Uhl there. Where's his bits? God, we've missed his archaeology. Oh God, so frustrated with that. I had some artifacts which I was going to show you. They're not there. Never mind. At the site he was excavating, site just south of Lima in the 1890s, became the first important step in establishing an area-wide chronology for Peru. So now in places like South America and Central America, they were using the same techniques that were being pioneered by Flinders Petrie and Rivers to other civilizations, to to those Nazca people, to those people of the Inca, all concentrated on graves and the careful recording of grave goods associated. And he would use that sense of seriation, he would use the sense of stratigraphy and all the techniques available at the time. So this was a groundbreaking archaeologist, a German groundbreaking archaeologist working in South America. But turning again to North America was this man. This man is called Alfred Kidder, 1885 to 1963. Now you can see the Mesa there, and look at that there. One of 200 villages, towns associated with Mesa Verde. You can actually nicely see that in the background. Alfred Kidder was the leading Americanist of his time, as well as being a major figure in Mayan archaeology. He was largely responsible for putting the Southwest on the archaeological map with his excavations at the Picos ruins, a large pueblo in northern New Mexico. And there it is. There's his excavations. And his survey of the region obviously advanced what we know about early Native American civilizations. Work that had begun with Jefferson and work that had been lost, trying to work out, who the Native Americans were. And now Native Americans were back on the agenda. Kidder was one of the first archaeologists to use a team of specialists to help analyze artifacts and human remains. So in other words, instead of just using archaeologists, he had bone experts, he had wood experts with him. So he had a team of specialists. This is how modern day archaeology works. He is also important for his blueprint for a regional strategy. He would say that reconnaissance of archaeology was important to understand what was there. Then he would then select criteria for ranking remains of a site in chronology, seriation into a probable sequence, and then working out the stratigraphy of the excavation. And then he would use more detailed regional survey and dating, all different levels of archaeological sequencing and work that he would use to understand these sites. So he wouldn't just dig up a site. He would do reconnaissance first, and he would select what he wanted to work on. And he would try to put everything into order. And this is again, one of those waves of archaeologists leaving from the late 1800s into the 1900s, helping us really understand our world civilization, our world view, other than just Europe and bits of Africa. Southwestern archaeology. And it's just the good old days of archaeology. The artifacts of Picos. Very much since the 1950s and the 1960s, archaeology has come on in many more ways. On dry land, the economic boom of the 1960s led to the construction of new roads and buildings, which threatened and destroyed many archaeological sites and led to a new emphasis on managing the cultural heritage, either by preserving or by recording an excavation prior to destruction. In Europe, the redevelopment after the war of historical city centers led to highly complex excavations, spanning many periods and demanding many techniques of analysis. Finally, in recent years, the application of computerization in fieldwork has offered powerful new tools to help us recover and understand the remains left by past societies. And one area I'd like to do over the next few weeks as well, I'm trying to put it in there, is nautical archaeology and how that works. And then quickly, not only did we see landward archaeology, I hardly ever mention nautical archaeology in my seminars, but we will do one session. So one of these new fieldwork areas of investigation has been the nautical archaeological resource. One of these is underwater archaeology, which began as a serious method of research in the 1960s with the work of George Bass at the Bronze Age Geli Donya shipwreck off the south coast of Turkey. George Bass was the first one person to excavate an ancient vessel entirely on the seabed. So instead of lifting everything up and trying to put it together, he excavated on the seabed in 1960s, the first shipwreck. Bass and his team invented or developed many now standard underwater techniques. And in many ways, we are now prepared to go on over the next few weeks to really look at archaeological excavation techniques in detail and how things are done. But before we actually open the mics fully, I would like to have Bill come in on this. Bill, me and Bill are going to have a little bit of a discussion. So we're going to stop the screen sharing. So Bill, just thee and me now, mano on mano, right?
Okay, man to man.
So Bill, tell us why you became interested in archaeology and then how that led on to your first archaeological excavation.
I became interested in history first when I was a lad. When I used to visit my grandparents' house in Cwmpenna near Mountain Ash, because it was a large house full of Victorian and Edwardian furniture. You know, the atmosphere was so different to my own little terraced house in a mining valley town. So I've always been interested in history. And as a result, I was always good at it at school, actually, the only thing. That evolved then as I got older, when I had more time, to join in my local history society. And I wrote a book on the antiquities of Marga Mountain, where Mortimer Wheeler excavated in 1921, actually. And when that book was published, I had contact straight away from an American lady called Dr. Brenda Franey. She ran a private archaeology company based in Texas, actually, but she was intensely interested in the Celtic, if I can use that word, period in Wales and Scotland. So she managed to hear of my book, and she wanted to excavate a site called the British Fortified Residence at the time, which is probably the largest house plot from Glamorgan, not far from where I'm talking to you from now. So she got in touch with me and told me her plans to get permits from Cadw to excavate this particular site to see if they could date it, etc. And she wanted to know if I would help and be a local coordinator on local history and get in my own local history society members involved in helping the excavations. So it was all set up. We started the dig, and the two main archaeologists were people you know, David Connolly and Adam Sanford. And they had all the gear there, everything was there. It was a very professionally run dig, it really was, you know. So David and Adams taught us the basics of what we should be doing once they actually excavate the trench and what we should be looking for. And the first layer to go down, you know, to be inspected and cleaned, etc. Before the second layer, blah, 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 profiling of the trench, etc. And reporting any unusual finds, obviously. So that evolved then the following year into excavating another mound close by, which proved fruitless. And then I was involved with excavating a site at Castlefield, which was about a mile north of Cardiff Gate interchange on the M4. The following year, she was doing a dig up near Dalkeith in Edinburgh, trying to locate and prove the existence of a Knights Templar church there. So myself and Tom, who you know, I went up there and we spent a full week there excavating and learning even more. And that was an amazing experience to work with professionals and learn how things were done. And and realizing then how hard it was on your knees as well, especially as you get older. But yeah, it's and the amazing thing with archaeology, as you know, and we all know, you've always got that expectation when you dig down of finding something. You always expect to find something. If you don't, and if you don't, you keep going, and you think, I'm going to find something, and eventually you actually do find some little thing, and it makes it all worthwhile, I think, just to find that little something which is confirmed as from the period, and our value to actually date the site and find out in context exactly what was going on there. So basically, that's my interest in archaeology. And since I joined you, Carl, obviously, I've been to some amazing places with you, and that's really boosted my interest even further. So the interest keeps going up and up and up. It doesn't go down. Once you got the bug, it's like golf. You can't get rid of it. Yeah. So that's my take on my little archaeology history.
Thank you very, very much for that, Bill. I really appreciate that. I think we lost Bill's mic for a minute then, but I'm not going to bore you to death with my archaeological career. But one of the things that everybody wants to do in archaeology is to excavate, and it would be good to actually visit some excavations with what we're doing now over the next few weeks. So that's what I fully intend to do. So we'll be looking at an excavation next week and how things are done, and we'll look at some upstanding archaeology as well. So what we're going to, anyway, I really appreciate that, Bill. That was a really nice overview. And maybe I'll drag in Ellen next week with her experiences of being on an archaeological excavation, but I won't embarrass her this week. So I would like to ask if there's any questions from anybody. So let's see. Any questions from you, wonderful Richie Babes? I know Richard has been digging his whole life.
Yeah.
Go on, Rich.
I've got nothing really to say.
All right. Okay. Fair enough.
Like, nothing on what we've been discussing today.
Okay. What about you, Ellen?
No, nothing at all. But that was lovely sequential information about all these archaeologists. Thank you.
And I wanted to keep it sequential, and we did. And there's so many different names in archaeology that we could have done. But over the weeks in my lectures, I always put a few in there now and again. So we come across lots of different characters. What about you, Anne? No. Oh, God.
Jump in instead, Carl. I got a question.
She's always awkward, Anne. Go on, Bill.
This arbitrary division of history into Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc. I assume that was some fairly modern thing. But obviously, if it was, it stemmed back to Hesiod and his ideas of doing it in the first place.
Yeah,
I assume.
This is Hesiod. I think the biggest thing of today is, Hesiod identified 800 years BC, the Iron Age, and the beginning of he identified the age of bronze, and he identified the age of iron that he was living in. When he was writing, that was the beginning of the Iron Age. He was there. He saw the boundaries. So we know these boundaries exist. He lived that day as we live the computer age. We were all of us saw the beginning of the computer age. We all saw it. We all existed when we first started to see the internet going everywhere. The internet age, the web age. We were at the beginning. Like Hesiod was at the beginning of this Iron Age. So these boundaries have always been there, but as Bill knows, and as all of us know, these boundaries can sometimes be broken. They're not written in gold. Unless you've got a specific date, like the 24th of August, AD 79, when Vesuvius erupted and covered Pompeii, right? You don't get that. There's no moment. I joke sometimes in the lectures, the 24th of August in the year 750 years BC began the Iron Age, right? Sometimes at 415, right? But we don't get that. We do get it at Pompeii, but we don't get it. And sometimes we've got to push through those barriers. Sometimes when me and Richard are doing some research, we say, well, that's not right. Maybe there's a bit more to it. And that's what you've got to do. Being inquisitive is an archaeologist. Believing everything you read is more a historian.
Mm.
So it's breaking that barrier. As I keep saying, the archaeologists find the things, right? We break barriers. Historians are there to read what they see. Archaeologists are to expand those barriers and to break those barriers and to learn more. And as Bill said, you always expect to find something more. And that's a very key point. So who's left? Jessica's the last word, but Anne goes first.
Oh, no, that's it's very good lesson tonight. Thank you.
Makes a change, Anne, because you're always talking about something else. And then finally, let's have a final word from Jess Ika.
I thought it was really good. I've been looking into sort of that myself, but on a more specific level on something else. But I think one thing that's also an issue is sort of periodization when it comes to things like that. Names for periods as well can sort of harm an archaeological excavation. I think one thing, well, not things, sometimes archaeologists have a little bit of anxiety of breaking past what documentary historians have said.
Yes.
And they need to sort of be the horse that pulls the cart, really.
I can be the horse or the donkey that pulls the cart. Sometimes the donkey. But yeah, you are very, very right there. So we know what we're up against next week. So that's what we're going to do next week. If there's no more questions, I'm going to bid you an all good night, and we're going to have a little bonfire in the garden now. So after a nice warm cup of tea. So
Okay,
if nobody's got anything else to say, I'm going to say good night to Bill, Richard Babes, Ellen, Anne, and Jessica Babes, and I'll see you all next week.
Bye then, everyone.
Night, folks. Bye.
I say the quality of fireworks have gone downhill terribly. That's all they are, big noises and no pretty lights or anything, just like explosions, you know.
You know what
It's
you could
horrible.
You know what you could do
I
it,
don't
Anne?
have any.
Is take a bit of marijuana and then just imagine they're exploding, and that's
It's
good.
like everyone wants to be in the World War II or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that.
Well,
Bye-bye.
bye. See you, Anne. No. Anyway, I'll see you in a week, Rich.
Yeah. Okie doke, Carl. Oh,
Take
I
care.
tell you what I was going to tell you as well.
Yeah, go on.
I see, oh, what's his name? Johnny Lambert, is it?
Oh, he's been having a go at me, is he? I don't want to know.
Oh, no, there's a petition going about the Cosmiston.
Oh, God, what's
on the other
happened?
side of the road.
What's happened? Go on, tell me.
Oh, it's just a petition going.
To stop the development.
Yeah.
Well, put it this way, he's not going to be able to stop that, but yeah.
I think they've got a fair few people have signed this, you know.
Yeah.
A few thousand, I think, so.
Oh, right, that's good. Is this is online, is it?
Yeah, it actually came up on, you know, on the news on my, I'm on that Bing, you know, on my home page, and it came up on there.
Oh, nice. Cool.
But, yeah, I think it's on Facebook and everything.
Yeah.
I haven't looked on there, but.
No. Well, share it if you want. Like, you know, that'd be fine.
Apparently, he dug a trench up there. And
Where?
found
Right.
somewhere up on the farm, I take it.
Ah, right, yeah.
Because they're on about the farmhouse will be flattened.
Yes.
Which is, I think they're trying to take it to Cadw to get it sort of, I reckon the farmhouse itself is like 400 years old.
Yeah. Cadw won't.
They
Cadw,
do all this due for demolition and everything. So.
yeah. I don't know.
Oh well.
It's all fun and games. Another ball game started.
Yeah.
It's typical Vale Glamorgan, as Michelle would say.
Yeah, that's it.
God.
Land there, build on it. Price.
Exactly. Anyway, I'm going now. I'll see you soon, Rich. Bye.
Bye. Cheers, Carl. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Before you go, Carl, can I ask you something?
Well, you can, because there's nobody else around. I'm going to stop the recording now as 1, 2, 3.